Well, just wait for the next part of the schedule in the Big 12 for a sledgehammer to chop on somebody's head or it just to be a street fight. Yesterday, with Baylor winning at West Virginia in a game as we were closing out the show, they were able to close that out at Morgantown after losing 2 in a row. Texas Tech just obliterated Iowa State in what was a very competitive game, and all of a sudden they just took off. And they even had a moment in that game, 2 moments in that game where the crowd exploded like they always do anyway, was McCullough to Shannon on an alley-oop. Of course, they had missed some time. McCullough's been back the last game or two, played against Baylor, had a dunk. The place went nuts. But also during that game, they announced the Texas game. And their loss at home to Kansas State, and the crowd exploded that moment as well. And then Kansas last night with a gritty win against Oklahoma in a game in when they outscored the Sooners down the stretch in the last 3 minutes. Oklahoma seemed to have that, but KU found a way. Tonight, TCU and Oklahoma State will play. Jay Billis, who did the game, West Virginia Baylor, will join us today. Also, Jason King will discuss men's basketball in the Big 12. But how do you know? How do you know? Kansas State looked like they could be left behind. They've now beaten Texas and also Texas Tech in the last couple of games. Texas Tech had the run where they beat Kansas and Baylor. I just mentioned Iowa State. Baylor looked like they were reeling, and they found a way without Akinjo and yet again no Sohan, and won the game at Morgantown. And Kansas is kind of doing their thing. This is so much fun. You don't know from game to game.
No, it's the Big 12. It's madness. I think the big story right now, and it's kind of, Baylor, got off the schneid yesterday by beating West Virginia, so they're not the big story of on a losing streak anymore. The big story is Texas raided the transfer portal like crazy, and right now they're staring down the barrel of maybe not even making the NCAA tournament if they keep on this track. I don't think that's probably going to happen, but they've got to get out of a huge funk. They're not winning games.
Why do you think it probably? They're 3-3, and they still have a lot of games in front of them. They could end up under 500.
The reason I think so is because Chris Beard. I think he's a good enough coach to get them to where they need to be. But right now, it's scary. It's kind of like, look, the transfer, if you're a college basketball team, and this is probably different for college football because the really good teams don't need to really get into the portal. You might get one guy, Justin Fields for Ohio State, put them certainly at a place they would have been maybe differently than they were. But if you're a college basketball team and you completely raid the transfer portal and have, of your 12 scholarship players, 9 of them are from the portal, that's kind of like the Yankees going out and spending big in free agency and then not making the playoffs. Transfer portal's supposed to pay off for you.
I think it's interesting that half the league's under 500 in conference play. I think that's kind of an interesting little note. You got a bunch of teams at 2-4 right now, or 2-3. Half the league. West Virginia's 2-3, Oklahoma State's 2-3, Oklahoma's 2-4, Iowa State, they're number 15, and yet they're 2-4 in the conference. K-State's now 2-4, and then everybody else has at least one loss. So very interesting. Yeah, Texas is there at 500 at 3-3, so they're not in make or break territory quite just yet. But look at TCU at 2-1. Who had them at the upper half of the standings at this point? But yeah, it's been a fun year. Last night was a lot of great hoops. Curious to just see the result tonight. Not admittedly very excited about that game. I don't have much of a reason to be outside of just being a casual observer, so I'm curious to see how that one goes. But yeah, KU's in the driver's seat right now, but Texas Tech is breathing down their neck, and I don't think Baylor's going to go away. Baylor right now, injuries are a real legitimate issue. It's not just they lost a couple games. They're hurt. They're hurt. And it's not an excuse. It's legitimate. Like they are banged up, and that's why we've seen them not play as well the last couple of games. So once they get healthy, if they can get healthy, we know they'll be better. Texas Tech's starting to get healthy. Maybe Texas is able to put it together, but you can't let your guard down any night. I think that's the lesson, is you can't ever just go into any Big 12 game, no matter who's, across the front of the jersey, and think, oh, well, this is just going to be an easy win, because then you get popped by a K-State, or you get popped by West Virginia, or you get popped by somebody you're supposed to. So, yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of, beating up on each other throughout this year.
Marcus Carr is one of those transfers that Chris Beard brought in. And I watched part of that game. He was spectacular, but he did miss the shot that would have given him the win at the end of the game. But without him, they're not in that game. 25 points. He was money. But Kansas State, after they had lost earlier this year to Texas, kind of had the loss by 13, and Smith for K-State was doing the horns down at the end of the game. He was living it up. Said he was not happy with the way the Texas fans exploded when they won the game up in Manhattan. So there's a little bit of bad blood there. But here's the thing about Texas. They lost to Gonzaga in non-conference play. They also lost to Seton Hall in non-conference play. Those are the only non-conference games that are against ranked opponents. They have Tennessee coming up, and that game is at home against Rick Barnes in Tennessee at the end of the month in that SEC Big 12 Challenge. So that's a top 25 team. But the conference is so good, your non-conference schedule can sometimes not hurt you. But right now, when you look at Jeff Goodman, or you read Rob Douster, or you read others who kind of measure this thing, UT's non-conference schedule with who they are right now in conference play could come back to bite them. But Ken Pomeroy, the Ken Pom numbers, they're in the top 20 at 17 as far as his data. Gonzaga, Baylor, Villanova, Purdue, and Kentucky are the top 5, and Kansas is at number 7. So that's kind of what happened last night. Kansas State with a win in Austin. They just kind of hung around. That's kind of what they do with Bruce Weber. But then I watched Texas Tech, and I got to tell you, I'm watching that game, and like my jaw dropped a couple of times because, one, we know they play great defense. That's what they are. They're a feisty, in-your-face defense. But they are getting points from a lot of different people. And they just absolutely wore down Iowa State. That thing got out of hand pretty quickly. Let's discuss Baylor because we were off the air about the time the game ended. You look at Matthew Meyer and L.J. Cryer, who played well even in the loss to Oklahoma State. He was about all they had in that game. Those two guys went for 20-plus and career highs, and they found a way, Paul.
Yeah.
They found a way to win the game in Morgantown. And you drop that game, you're right there with UT at 3-3 and a bunch of others.
They got Matthew Meyer out of his head. I think he was a little bit in his head when it came to offense because part of it was, and look, to the coaching staff's credit, they convinced him that he had to be a good defensive player too and had to be more than a one-trick pony and got him out of his head and said, okay, you can do all this at one game. You don't have to pick defense one game and offense the other. You can do it all together. So credit to the coaching staff and to Matthew Meyer for getting out of his head, but credit to Matthew Meyer for helping Adam Flagler get out of his head and contribute late and help them build that lead because Flagler was on a game and a half streak of awful, which is not characteristic of him. He is one of their best players. He's maybe their best shooter. Although if you ask Matthew Meyer, it's different.
We'll get to that.
But yeah, L.J. Cryer, who's been the sixth man, essentially. I mean, you don't really think of Baylor players like that. It's just the way that they roll in a matchup. But he's the first guy off the bench, and he has been scoring for them pretty much every night that he's been in there, and was the guy who kept them kind of going, even in the lulls. So L.J. Cryer finally showing what he was very lauded out of high school here in Texas. Finally showing what that means.
He's a sweet shooting kid. He was the 5th all-time leading scorer in Texas high school basketball history. You don't hear that much, but the amount of talent that's come out of Texas really for the last 25 or 30 years in basketball to the college level is pretty darn remarkable. You hear about football, running backs, yards, quarterbacks, whatever. L.J. Cryer was the 5th all-time scorer in Texas high school basketball history when he came out of high school, had a career-high 25 points. Now, after the game, there's a Zoom, of course, with Scott Drew and Matthew Meyer, L.J. Cryer, and this is a short clip. Matthew Meyer, there was a picture of Matthew Meyer at the end of the game with 2 or 3 Baylor fans. He had a mink around his neck. He looked like, I wish I could find that picture, like he could have absolutely been in Russia with the KGB. He is a character. We all know he loves to shoot. He's changed who he is and what he became last year and what he needs to be and what he's trying to be this year. So he was asked by us in the media post-game Zoom about what did he tell Adam Flagler about playing the point guard position.
sometimes your confidence can just go down. So, but I told him, like, the best thing you do is shoot. And I think he was trying to play too much of like a pure point guard role, which he can definitely do, but I think he was just hesitating on his shot. So I told him, just like, bro, you might be the best shooter here besides me. And so, like, just let him rip.
You might be the best shooter here besides me. He had to kind of like, and he might be right. He probably, when he's hot, he's unbelievable. Is that a Matthew Meyer? That should be the name of his autobiography.
Yeah, the best shooter besides me.
Yeah, you're the best shooter besides me.
Yeah, no, I mean that's very Matthew Meyer, and look, he's a guy who needs that kind of swagger on the court. We haven't seen it offensively, and they got him going, and he needs to keep that up. And not just when Akinjo comes back. I mean, obviously, a guy like Akinjo comes in, points are going to go down for everybody else, but they'll probably go up in general because Akinjo's a scoring point guard and one of the best in the country. But, when that happens, though, he needs to just keep firing. That's what he wasn't doing early in the year. And it was kind of weird where you see Matthew Meyer, a guy who was, like a Gatling gun when it came to shooting the ball. All of a sudden, he becomes this really solid defensive player and starts making plays in transition that he wasn't making before. But then he quit. He kind of, holstered the gun a little bit. And you can do both. A happy life is all about balance. And I think once he finds that, he'll be great.
So that's Matthew Meyer. Craig, was that a great Matthew Meyer quote? If you could ever put a book together with him on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun little quote. He had a good game last night or yesterday, and it's good to see them get a win. And, they're going to need more of that. He's got a great personality, but it's only fun when they're winning. I think it's probably annoying if you're losing games. So the fact that they got to have a laugh and enjoy that one, that was a big win. They needed that in a bad way to go on a 3-game losing streak and then turn around and play Oklahoma, who, I mean, it's not a given that you're going to beat them. You're expected to, but it's not a given like we just got done saying a few minutes ago. So, yeah, that was a huge win. Cryer was great. Meyer was great, and they need a lot more of that before these other guys return. So we'll see if they can keep their head up. I mean, I know they can keep their head above water, but how well they can swim while they're shorthanded remains to be seen. But they did a good job yesterday.
I texted Jerome Tang. I had a conversation with him Sunday evening. I just said, would you consider that, and I know this can be maybe overrated. Jay Bilas will join us, former Duke star and also ESPN analyst, will join us here at 3:20 in just a moment. He did the broadcast. He was not on site because the winter weather and they just aren't quite able to do all of that yet. Sometimes games are with the broadcasters on site, but he'll join us at 3:20. Golly, I just absolutely went blank on what was. So here's a part of the chat room. Stat of the day from David Floyd. Bracketology. The Big 12 has all their teams ranked inside the top 65 of the net rankings. That means any conference road game is a Q1 game. And that's why if you're Texas, your non-conference schedule with the losses to Gonzaga, Seton Hall, or anyone else, Kansas State has jumped right back in the conversation. Well, Craig, you mentioned that a lot of teams are under 500 when it comes to the conference. Everybody in the conference is above 500 overall. Now, some teams feed off of the minions and whatever else in non-conference play. Every single team, Oklahoma State 9-7, Kansas State is at 10-7. Everybody is above 500 overall. That's not a surprise, but that's an interesting note from David Floyd on the bracketology quote note of the day. All right, when we come back, Jay Bilas, ESPN analyst, he'll join us next on Sikkim 365 Radio. Discover Woodway.